"You should drink that quickly, Samuel." "It's getting warm," whispered my mother-in-law Margaret, gently pushing the champagne glass toward my lips with that icy smile I had learned to fear. My wedding reception was in full swing. 200 guests were celebrating in the elegant ballroom of the country club, the golden lights reflecting off the crystal while the orchestra played our song. My wife Isabella was dancing with her father a few feet away, radiant in her wedding dress that had cost more than my car. But something was terribly wrong with that glass. The golden liquid had a slightly different texture, almost oily, and an aroma that didn't match the Dom Perignon champagne we had been serving all night. A subtle chemical smell that set off all the alarms in my pharmacy training. "My name is Samuel, I'm 28 years old, and I just married the woman of my dreams." Or at least that's what I thought until 3 hours ago, when I overheard my in-laws whispering in the back hallway about how I was just a leech who had manipulated Isabella to gain access to the Morrison family fortune. "We don't want him to have any claim to the inheritance when Dad dies," Robert Morrison, my father-in-law, had whispered to Margaret. "The will needs to be changed before it's too late." "He won't even notice," she had replied. "It's just enough to make him sick. Then we'll say it was food poisoning, cancel the honeymoon, and during his recovery, we'll take care of the paperwork." Now, looking at that glass, I understood the plan perfectly. The Morrisons owned a pharmaceutical chain worth over $50 million. Robert had inherited the business from his father and expanded it aggressively over the past 30 years. Margaret came from a family of elite Boston doctors. They had built an empire based on connections, old money, and an arrogance that made them believe that people like me, the son of a suburban mechanic who paid his own way through college by working 3 jobs, existed only to be used or discarded. When I met Isabella in college, she was studying French literature and I was finishing pharmacy school. We fell genuinely in love, spending hours talking about books, traveling by bus to small towns on weekends, sharing instant ramen in my tiny apartment. But the moment I introduced Isabella to my parents, simple, honest people who welcomed me with a tight hug and a home-cooked dinner, and then met the Morrisons at their $2 million mansion, I understood that I was entering a world that saw me as a threat. During our 2 years together, they never missed an opportunity to subtly humiliate me. Comments about my lack of refinement, suggestions that Isabella deserved someone of higher social standing, invitations to events where I clearly didn't fit in, followed by snide remarks about how uncomfortable I looked in sophisticated settings. Isabella defended our relationship, but I could see how they planted seeds of doubt. "Are you sure he's not just interested in your future?" they would ask when they thought I wasn't listening. The marriage proposal happened during a romantic weekend I organized with my own savings at a simple bed and breakfast in the mountains. Isabella said yes through tears of happiness, but when we told the Morrisons, the reaction was like a funeral. They immediately took control of the wedding, hiring the most expensive planner in town, choosing a venue that cost more than my annual salary, inviting people I didn't even know. "It's a Morrison family tradition," they explained, as if that ended any discussion. During the months of preparation, I heard whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Mysterious meetings with lawyers. Tense phone calls where my name was mentioned with disdain. 3 weeks before the wedding, I accidentally discovered an email Robert had left open on his computer. "Samuel cannot have access to the family funds. Look for legal loopholes in the prenuptial agreement." That's when I started recording our conversations. Now, holding that poison glass, I looked Margaret straight in the eye. She was 65 years old, with impeccably coiffed silver hair, and she was wearing a Chanel dress that cost more than most people earn in a year. His cold blue eyes studied me with the same expression a scientist would use to observe a lab rat. "Cheers," she said, raising her own glass of genuine champagne. "If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal and calculated revenge, don't forget to subscribe to the channel." Because what Margaret Morrison didn't know was that I had recorded every word of their conversation 3 hours earlier. And what was about to happen would turn the most expensive wedding party of the social season into something no one would ever forget. I raised the glass to my face, pretending to drink, but only allowing the liquid to touch my lips without swallowing. The bitter metallic taste confirmed my suspicions. There was definitely something chemical mixed into the champagne. Margaret smiled smugly when she saw the movement, her cold eyes flashing with a malice she normally hid behind her refined socialite mask. Next to her, Robert adjusted the cuffs of his $2,000 shirt, watching me with the same expression he used when examining financial reports, calculating, impatient, waiting for results. The Morrisons weren't just rich. They were a pharmaceutical dynasty that controlled 70% of the independent pharmacies in 3 states. Robert had inherited 15 stores from his father and, through a combination of aggressive expansion tactics and strategic mergers, had turned the business into a $50 million empire. Margaret, for her part, came from a medical family that went back 4 generations. Her great-grandfather had been one of the founders of Boston General Hospital, and she had grown up believing that certain people were simply born to lead while others existed to serve. From the first family dinner 2 years ago, they made it clear where I fit into that hierarchy. "So Samuel," Robert had said that first night, cutting his steak with precise movements, "Isabella told us you work at a pharmacy downtown. It must be interesting to see how our industry works from the other side of the counter." The way he said "behind the counter" carried all the disdain of someone who had never worked a day in his life in a position that wasn't executive. "Actually, Mr. Morrison," I had replied politely, "I'm finishing my master's degree in clinical pharmacology. I work at the pharmacy to pay for my studies." Margaret had let out a laugh that sounded like broken glass. "How admirable. Nothing like a man who works hard to—" "What did you say, Isabella?" "Oh yes, earn his place in the world." The imaginary quotation marks in her words were almost visible. Over the next few months, every family gathering became a new opportunity to subtly humiliate me. When Isabella and I announced our engagement, Robert had forgotten to include me in the official family photos. Margaret constantly corrected my pronunciation of French words during dinner, even when I pronounced them correctly. The worst incident happened last Christmas. Margaret had organized a charity party at her house, inviting the city's medical and pharmaceutical elite. When she introduced me to Dr. Harrison, director of Chicago's most prestigious hospital, she said, "This is Samuel, Isabella's friend. He works at a drugstore." She didn't mention my master's degree, my research on drug interactions, or the fact that I had just received an offer for a doctoral program. "Just works at a drugstore," as if I were an unqualified clerk. Dr. Harrison gave me a limp handshake and immediately changed the subject. Isabella was furious when she found out, but her confrontations with her parents always ended the same way. "Honey," Margaret would say in that condescending voice she used, "we're just concerned about your future. You deserve someone who can complement your social standing." Compliment was code for have money of his own. Robert was more direct in his objections. During a conversation I accidentally overheard through the half-open door of his office, he had said to Margaret, "The boy is smart, I'll give him that. But intelligence without connections or capital is useless. He'll always be dependent on her, always insecure, always trying to prove he deserves to be here." "What if they have children?" Margaret had replied. "You want your grandchildren to carry the DNA of what family? His father is a mechanic, for God's sake." At that moment, pressed against the hallway wall, I felt something break inside me. Not my love for Isabella, that remained unshaken. But whatever residual respect I might have had for her parents simply vanished. I began to really pay attention. I watched Robert talk to suppliers on the phone, using his dominant market position to push for unfair prices. I heard Margaret make cruel comments about lower-class people, when she thought no one was listening. I saw how they treated their employees, polite on the surface, but with a coldness that made it clear they considered them replaceable. What bothered me most was how they manipulated Isabella. They knew exactly which buttons to push to make her feel guilty about her choices. "Your grandmother would be so disappointed," Margaret would say whenever Isabella defended our relationship. "She dreamed of seeing you married into our society." Isabella always gave in a little after these conversations, becoming quieter, more uncertain about us. That's when I started recording our family conversations. At first, it was just to have evidence in case they tried to sabotage our relationship more directly. I installed a discrete app on my phone that automatically recorded when it detected certain keywords. Words like Samuel, money, inheritance, and family. What I discovered was far worse than I had expected. Margaret had hired a private investigator to dig into my past, looking for anything she could use against me. Robert had consulted lawyers about protecting the family assets in case Isabella and I got married, even with a prenuptial agreement. And 3 weeks ago, I recorded the conversation that changed everything. "Fathers will needs to be changed before it's too late," Robert had said to Margaret during a call he made from his car, not knowing that Isabella had left his phone connected to the house's Bluetooth while he was in the backyard. "What do you mean?" Margaret replied. If anything happens to us, the entire estate goes to Isabella. And if she's married to that parasite, he automatically has a claim to everything as a surviving spouse. But the prenuptial agreement, it has loopholes. My lawyer confirmed it. If we've been married for more than 5 years, he can contest it and would likely win a substantial portion. There was a long pause before Margaret spoke again, her voice lower. What if Isabella wasn't here to inherit? Margaret. I'm not suggesting anything terrible, Robert. But accidents happen. And it would be a tragedy if she suffered some kind of severe food poisoning shortly after the wedding. Especially if her husband, with all his pharmaceutical knowledge, was around and failed to save her. My blood ran cold as I listened. They weren't just planning to hurt me, they were considering hurting Isabella. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at Isabella sleeping beside me, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, completely unaware of the evil that lived in her own parents' hearts. That's when I decided I needed to protect her. And the best way to do that was to get rid of the threat the Morrisons posed. Over the next few days, I began digging deep into the family business. As a pharmacist, I had access to databases that showed prescription patterns, adverse effect reports, and audit records that could reveal irregularities. What I found was a systematic pattern of manipulation. Morrison pharmacies regularly overstocked expensive medications just before seasonal price increases. They had undocumented agreements with certain doctors to promote specific drugs. And most damning of all, there was evidence that they occasionally sold drugs nearing their expiration date to nursing homes and low-income clinics without warning them about the dates. I compiled everything into a detailed dossier, but kept it safe. I still hoped we could find a way to coexist peacefully. That hope died earlier today when I overheard the conversation in the back hallway. Now, holding the poison glass, I watched Margaret discreetly check her Cartier wristwatch. She was timing how long it would take for whatever was in the drink to take effect. Robert approached, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Samuel, my boy," he said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear, "I hope you're enjoying your wedding party. After all," he lowered his voice to a whisper only I could hear, "it may be the last time you feel so healthy." The smile that accompanied those words was that of a man who believed he had just pulled off the perfect con. But as he turned away to greet other guests, I kept my expression neutral and began counting in my head. Based on what I knew about gastrointestinal absorption and the time that had passed since the toast, they would expect to see the first symptoms in about 15 to 20 minutes. What they didn't know was that I hadn't swallowed a drop. And in the next 20 minutes, I would execute the plan I had meticulously prepared over the last 3 weeks. 22 minutes after pretending to drink the poison champagne, I began my performance. First, I accidentally dropped the glass while talking to guests, the crystal shattering on the marble floor. A few drops of the contaminated liquid spilled, creating physical evidence that would be crucial later. "Excuse me," I muttered, running my hand across my forehead. "I'm feeling a little dizzy. It must be the excitement of the day." Margaret appeared instantly at my side, her eyes shining with a satisfaction she could barely hide. "Oh dear, you look pale. Perhaps you should sit down." "No," I insisted, staggering slightly. "I don't want to spoil our party. Isabella would be worried." Robert approached with a look of feigned concern, but his eyes betrayed the same morbid anticipation. "Samuel, you look really ill. Shall we get a doctor?" "Please no," I replied, my voice slightly shaky. "I just need some fresh air. Perhaps my tie is too tight." As I acted out my supposed poisoning, I discreetly observed the reactions around me. Isabella had noticed the commotion and was coming toward us, her wedding dress flowing as she crossed the hall. Her eyes were filled with genuine concern, contrasting sharply with her parents' pretense. "Samuel, what happened?" she asked, grabbing my arm. "Just feeling a little ill," Margaret replied before I could speak. "Probably wedding stress. You know how men get nervous on important days." The condescending laugh that accompanied her words made my stomach churn. Not from the poison I hadn't ingested, but from the casual cruelty with which she manipulated even her own daughter. "I'll call Dr. Hendricks," Isabella said, scanning the guests. "He's here today." "No," Robert said quickly, then modulated his voice to sound calmer. "I mean, we don't need to alarm the guests. Perhaps Samuel just needs to lie down for a while." It was then that I realized the full extent of his plan. They didn't just want to poison me, they wanted to control exactly how my illness would be treated, avoiding any doctor who might identify the substance in my system. Dr. Martin Hendricks was a man of integrity in his 60s who had treated my family when I was a child. He knew my medical history and, more importantly, had no financial ties to the Morrisons that could compromise his judgment. Isabella is right, I said, straightening up slightly. Dr. Hendricks can just check my blood pressure, just to make sure it's nothing serious. I saw Robert and Margaret exchange a look of well-disguised panic. Samuel, dear, Margaret tried again, perhaps we should go home where you can get some rest. But Isabella had already spotted Dr. Hendricks and was waving him over. The doctor was a tall gentleman with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses he had worn for decades. "What's going on here?" he asked in his warm voice, already assuming his professional manner. "Samuel isn't feeling well," Isabella explained. "He knocked over his glass and seems dizzy." Dr. Hendricks placed an experienced hand on my forehead, then checked my pulse. Your pulse is a little fast. Let's go somewhere quieter where I can examine him properly." "Really, that's not necessary," Robert insisted, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. "I'm sure it's just nerves. Perhaps we should take Samuel home." "Nonsense," Dr. Hendricks replied firmly. "In my 40 years of medicine, I've learned that it's always better to be sure. Samuel, how are you feeling specifically?" The moment had come to plant the seeds that would grow into the destruction of the Morrisons. "I have a strange taste in my mouth," I replied slowly, as if analyzing my symptoms. "Kind of metallic. And my stomach is queasy. But it's not like normal nerves. It's different." Dr. Hendricks frowned. As an experienced physician, he knew the importance of specific symptoms. "A metallic taste is interesting. Have you eaten or drunk anything unusual today?" "Just the champagne in the toast," I replied, watching Margaret turn visibly pale. "Where's the glass?" Dr. Hendricks asked, looking around. "It broke when it fell," Margaret said quickly. "We've had everything cleaned up." But I had anticipated this. During the minutes of preparation for my act, I had discreetly collected a few drops of the champagne in a tissue that was now tucked away in my inside pocket. "Actually," I said, pretending to remember suddenly, "I think I still have some on the handkerchief I used to wipe my hand when the glass broke." I carefully removed the handkerchief, showing the small damp stains of the contaminated liquid. "Will this help?" Dr. Hendricks took the handkerchief and sniffed it discreetly. Her expression changed immediately. "Samuel, I need to ask you some questions," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "And I suggest we do this in private." "There's no need to be dramatic," Robert tried to intervene again, but Dr. Hendricks ignored him completely. "Isabella, can you show us a private room? And please ask someone to bring a glass of water. Samuel, don't eat or drink anything other than the water Dr. Isabella brings you personally." The specificity of this instruction made Margaret recoil involuntarily. As we made our way to the private office at the country club, I noticed Robert making discreet signals to Margaret. They needed to communicate urgently, but they couldn't stray too far without looking suspicious. In the office, Dr. Hendricks closed the door and examined me more closely. His expression was grave. "Samuel, in my years of practice, I've seen cases of poisoning before. The symptoms you've described, combined with the odor on this handkerchief, worry me greatly." I kept my expression one of innocent confusion. "Poisoning? Is that possible?" "Very possible. And considering that only you drank from that particular glass," he paused significantly, "we need to go to the hospital immediately for toxicology tests." "But my wedding party." "Samuel," Dr. Hendricks interrupted me gently, "if my suspicions are correct, your life may be in danger. Parties can be rescheduled. Lives cannot." It was at that moment that I made the decision that would change everything. "Dr. Hendricks," I said quietly, "I need to confess something. I didn't actually drink the champagne. I only pretended to because I suspected there was something wrong with it." The doctor studied me carefully. "Why would you suspect that?" "Because," I took a deep breath, preparing to take the step of no return, "I heard my in-laws planning to poison me this morning." The silence in the office was deafening. Dr. Hendricks watched me for a long moment, processing what I had just revealed. Do you have evidence of these conversations? He finally asked. I took my phone out of my inside pocket. Recordings. 3 weeks of recordings. Dr. Hendricks nodded slowly. Samuel, this is extremely serious. We need to involve the authorities immediately. I know, I replied. But we have to do this right. They are powerful, influential people. If we don't have irrefutable evidence. I understand perfectly, he said, taking out his own phone. I have a contact in the police department, Detective Martinez. She's discreet and efficient. While Dr. Hendricks made the call, I looked out the office window. In the main hall, I could see Margaret and Robert talking intensely in a secluded corner. Margaret was gesturing nervously while Robert kept checking his watch. They knew something had gone wrong. The time they had expected me to succumb to the poison had passed. My prolonged absence with Dr. Hendricks was making them increasingly desperate. But what they didn't know was that their attempt to murder me was only the tip of the iceberg. During the 3 weeks since I had discovered their plans, I had done much more than simply record conversations. I had contacted every relevant regulatory agency. I had sent anonymous dossiers to investigative journalists. I had copied financial files that showed decades of irregularities. And most importantly, I had discovered that I wasn't the first person they had tried to poison. 3 years ago, Margaret Morrison had nearly killed her own aunt to speed up an inheritance. The doctor who treated her at the time had documented suspicions of poisoning, but the family had hushed the case with money and influence. Detective Martinez nodded. It's time to confront them directly. But first, I need to coordinate with my team. We're going to need more agents here to arrest both of them simultaneously. Isabella, I replied through the door, I'm feeling better now. Dr. Hendricks says it was just a passing illness. We'll be leaving in a few minutes. My parents insist that you need immediate medical attention, she replied, her voice carrying a tension I rarely heard. They're very worried. What bitter irony. The same parents who had tried to poison me were now feigning desperate concern for my health. Detective Martinez made a few quick calls, arranging for discreet backup. I'll have 4 undercover agents positioned in the lobby in 10 minutes. When we leave this office, I want you to act normal for a few minutes. Let them approach you, try to control the situation. That will give us an opportunity to observe his behavior in real time. And then we'll confront them with the evidence and make the arrests. If you're following this incredible story of revenge and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what was about to happen in the main hall would be the most satisfying showdown you've ever seen. Dr. Hendricks carefully stored the samples of contaminated champagne in a sterile container he had requested from the country club. Samuel, I want you to know that you saved not only your own life today, but probably the lives of many people who depend on Morrison Pharmacy's medications. The saddest part, I replied, is that Isabella will find out that the parents she loved unconditionally are monsters willing to kill for money. She's strong, Detective Martinez said gently. And she has you to support her through this. As we prepared to leave the office, I mentally organized my final strategy. For 3 weeks, I had meticulously gathered evidence. Now I had qualified witnesses, physical samples, audio recordings, and the support of the authorities. But the most satisfying part would be seeing the look on Robert and Margaret Morrison's faces when they realized that their perfect plan had turned into their complete undoing. Outside the door, I could hear agitated voices. Isabella was clearly being pressured by her parents to take immediate action regarding my supposed medical condition. It's time, said Detective Martinez, checking his communication equipment. Remember, act natural, let them reveal their intentions, and trust us for the rest. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and prepared to take the final step in a revenge that had been 3 weeks in the making. When we opened that door, the Morrisons would discover that there was something far more dangerous than a rebellious young pharmacist. A rebellious young pharmacist with irrefutable evidence and the law on his side. When we left the office, the main hall was in controlled turmoil. Robert and Margaret circulated among the guests like sharks sensing blood, their social smiles unable to completely mask the desperation in their eyes. Samuel. Margaret practically ran toward us, her Chanel dress fluttering dramatically. Thank God you're better. We were so worried. Extremely worried, Robert echoed, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. Dr. Hendricks, what was your diagnosis? Dr. Hendricks kept his expression neutral. Just a passing illness. Samuel is recovering well. I saw Margaret and Robert exchange a quick look of utter confusion. According to their calculations, I should have been violently vomiting or passed out by now. Maybe we should still go home, Margaret insisted, her voice taking on an edge of urgency. Or to the hospital. You never know with these sudden illnesses. Actually, Detective Martinez interjected softly, approaching our group, I'd like to talk to you about the incident. I'm Detective Martinez from the police department. The blood literally drained from Robert's face. Police? Why would the police be here? Standard protocol when there's suspicion of poisoning at public events, she replied calmly, watching their reactions. Margaret let out a nervous laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Poisoning? That's absurd. It was just wedding stress. Then you wouldn't mind clarifying a few details, Detective Martinez continued, discreetly pulling out his tape recorder. Like who prepared the special champagne for the family toast? It was at that moment that Robert realized they were trapped. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit, some way to control the situation. I don't understand what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost all its usual authority. Dad, Isabella approached, genuine confusion written all over her face. What's going on? Why is the police here? Before Robert could answer, I took my phone out of my pocket. Isabella, there's something you need to know about your parents. Samuel no, Margaret whispered, her tone carrying a desperate threat. But it was too late. I pressed play on the most incriminating recording. Robert's voice echoed clearly through the small speaker. It's just enough to make him sick, not to kill him. She'll be hospitalized for a few days with what looks like food poisoning. That gives us time to change the will before the inheritance is transferred. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella turned pale as marble, her hands shaking violently. This can't be real, she whispered, looking between me and her parents. There's more, I said gently, advancing to another recording. Margaret's voice filled the air. If anything happens to us, the entire inheritance goes to Isabella. And it would be a tragedy if she were to suffer some kind of serious food poisoning shortly after the wedding. Isabella took a step back as if she had been physically struck. You were planning to hurt Samuel? And me too. Darling, you don't understand, Margaret tried to approach her, but Isabella backed away. I understand perfectly, Isabella replied, her voice gaining a strength I had never heard before. You tried to poison my husband on our wedding day. Robert tried one last desperate gambit. Samuel is clearly disturbed. He forged those recordings to frame us. Do you really believe we would do such a thing? Actually, Dr. Hendricks interjected, we have physical evidence as well. He held up the handkerchief with the samples of champagne. The liquid contains compounds that do not exist naturally. Compounds that would only be available through specialized pharmaceutical laboratories. That was when Margaret finally broke down. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she sobbed. We just wanted to protect our family, our legacy. Samuel is a stranger, an opportunist. An opportunist you tried to murder, Detective Martinez said dryly, motioning for the undercover agents to approach. Robert made one last attempt to maintain control. You don't have enough evidence. We are respected citizens of this community. We have the recordings, physical evidence, medical witnesses, Detective Martinez listed calmly, and 3 weeks of documentation on pharmaceutical fraud that your son-in-law collected. The shock on the Morrisons' faces was absolute. You didn't know, did you? I said, finally revealing the full extent of what I had discovered. While you were planning to poison me, I was exposing decades of crimes you've committed. Federal fraud, counterfeit drugs, negligent deaths in nursing homes. That doctor was still alive. And when he learned that the same pattern was repeating itself, he would be another crucial witness. Dr. Hendricks ended his call. Detective Martinez will be here in 15 minutes. She'll come disguised as a guest, so as not to alarm anyone. Perfect, I replied. And Dr. Hendricks? Thank you for believing me. Samuel, he said gently, I've known you since you were a boy. I know what kind of man you are. And more importantly, his expression hardened, I know the Morrisons' reputation in the medical community. The rumors have been around for years. That revelation hit me like a bolt of lightning. What kind of rumors? Pressure on doctors to alter causes of death. Elderly patients who died conveniently shortly after changes to their wills. Sudden deaths in families who had inheritance disputes with them. My revenge was about to expose much more than I had imagined. Outside the door, I heard hurried footsteps. Isabella knocked softly. Samuel? Is everything okay? My parents are insisting we leave now. Dr. Hendricks and I exchanged meaningful glances. Tell them we're almost done, Dr. Hendricks replied. Just a few more minutes. But as the footsteps receded, we both knew that the next few minutes would completely change our lives. And in the main hall, Robert and Margaret Morrison were about to discover that his perfect plan had turned into his worst nightmare. Detective Martinez arrived 15 minutes later, disguised perfectly as an elegant guest in a navy blue dress and discreet jewelry. She greeted a few guests casually before heading to the office where Dr. Hendricks and I were waiting for her. Mr. Samuel, she said, discreetly consulting her notes. Dr. Hendricks explained the situation to me on the phone. Do you have evidence to support your allegations? I took out my phone and showed her the folder of recordings I had compiled over the past 3 weeks. I have 27 recordings of conversations between Robert and Margaret Morrison discussing plans to harm me, including this morning's conversation where they specifically planned to poison me during the toast. Detective Martinez plugged headphones into my phone and listened to excerpts from the most incriminating recordings. Her professional expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes harden when she heard Margaret suggesting that accidents happen and Robert calculating dosages. These recordings are extremely disturbing, she finally said. And do you have the contaminated champagne? Dr. Hendricks handed her the handkerchief with the liquid samples. Based on the odor and the symptoms Samuel described, I suspect a modified anticholinergic. Something that would cause severe symptoms but could be mistaken for food poisoning. Perfect for someone with access to experimental pharmaceutical compounds, I added meaningfully. Detective Martinez jotted down notes. Samuel, I have to ask, why didn't you go to the authorities sooner? 3 weeks is a long time to plan a response. It was the question I had been expecting. Because the Morrisons are extremely powerful and connected in this city. Robert has friends in the police department, in city government, and financial ties to half a dozen judges. If I had gone to the police with only audio recordings, they would have found a way to cover up the case. So you decided to wait until they committed the crime? I decided to document a pattern of behavior and collect irrefutable evidence, I corrected. And during those 3 weeks, I discovered much more than attempted poisoning. I opened another folder on my phone, this one containing documents I had discreetly photographed during my visits to the Morrisons' home. Robert Morrison has been embezzling funds from the pharmaceutical company into offshore accounts. Margaret has records of payments to a private investigator who is digging into not only my life, but also the lives of other family members who might question the will. Detective Martinez studied the images. How did you gain access to these documents? Isabella gave me free access to her parents' house during the wedding preparations. I was genuinely trying to integrate myself into the family, so I spent time in Robert's office talking about pharmaceutical business. He left documents lying around, assuming I wouldn't understand their importance. But you did. I'm a pharmacist with a master's degree in clinical pharmacology. I recognize financial irregularities and suspicious prescribing patterns when I see them. It was then that I revealed my most devastating discovery. 6 months ago, I began analyzing prescribing patterns at Morrison pharmacies. I discovered that they are overcharging elderly patients, especially those with Medicare insurance. But what's worse, I found evidence that they're substituting expensive drugs with inadequate generic versions and pocketing the difference. Detective Martinez stopped typing. That's federal medical fraud. Exactly. And it affects hundreds of vulnerable patients. Some have probably died from ineffective drugs they received thinking they were full treatments. Dr. Hendricks leaned forward. Samuel, my God. Do you have evidence of this? I have purchase records, prescription reports, and financial documents showing discrepancies between what was purchased from suppliers and what was sold to patients. I also have records of suspicious deaths at 3 nursing homes that purchase medications exclusively from Morrison pharmacies. The silence in the office was heavy. Detective Martinez finally spoke. Samuel, Are you telling me that you uncovered a multimillion-dollar medical fraud operation while investigating attempted personal poisoning? I'm telling you that the Morrisons are people who see other human beings as obstacles or resources to be exploited. Trying to poison me is not an isolated crime. It's part of a pattern of behavior that has been going on for years. During our conversations in the office, I could hear the growing commotion outside. The party continued, but through the window I saw Robert and Margaret circling nervously among the guests, clearly looking for me. They're getting desperate, I observed. They probably expected me to be showing severe symptoms by now. And Isabella? Detective Martinez asked. Does she know about her parents' criminal activities? Isabella is completely innocent. She works as a curator at an art museum and has never been interested in the family's pharmaceutical business. Robert and Margaret have always kept her isolated from their questionable operations. It was at that moment that we heard a more insistent knock at the door. Samuel. It was Isabella's voice, now clearly concerned. Please, I need to talk to you. My parents are saying that you're very ill and that we need to go to the hospital immediately. Dr. Hendricks, Detective Martinez, and I exchanged meaningful glances. They want to take me to a specific hospital, I muttered. Probably one where they have medical connections that can control the diagnosis and treatment. Margaret collapsed heavily into a nearby chair. How did you find out? I'm a pharmacist, Margaret. I recognize criminal patterns when I see them. And you left a trail of evidence that stretches back years. At that moment, 3 more federal agents entered the hall, their FBI badges clearly visible. Robert and Margaret Morrison, the lead agent announced, you are under arrest for attempted murder, federal fraud, and violations of the Controlled Substances Act. As the handcuffs clicked around the Morrisons' wrists, Isabella collapsed into tears beside me. Not out of sadness, but out of relief and liberation. How did you know? She asked through her tears. Because someone who truly loves you would never try to control your life through fear or money, I replied, hugging her tightly. As the Morrisons were led from the hall in handcuffs, I noticed that our guests had formed a respectful circle around us. No one was filming or making a commotion. These were genuine people who understood that they had witnessed something deeper than drama. They had seen justice being served. Dr. Hendricks approached with a quiet smile. Samuel, you didn't just save your own life today. You saved countless patients who depend on honest medicine. But as I watched the Morrisons disappear through the country club door, my dominant feeling wasn't revenge or triumph. It was freedom. Finally, Isabella and I were free to build our life based on genuine love, not manipulation or financial control. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal courtroom as the judge read Robert and Margaret Morrison's final sentence. 20 years in prison for him, 15 for her, for attempted murder, federal fraud, and the wrongful death of 3 elderly patients. During the investigation, we discovered that they had poisoned 2 other people in the last 5 years, a business partner who questioned their practices and Margaret's own aunt, hastening her death to inherit her Cape Cod property. Isabella held my hand as her parents were led away in handcuffs. She had testified against them, revealing years of psychological manipulation and financial control that finally made sense. They never loved me, she whispered. They just saw me as an extension of their egos. Dr. Hendricks became the medical director of a foundation we created to monitor suspicious pharmaceutical practices. With the Morrisons' confiscated assets, we established a compensation fund for the victims' families and free clinics in the communities they had exploited. Detective Martinez visited me last week. Samuel, your evidence helped dismantle a corruption ring that spanned 3 states. Dozens of pharmaceutical executives are under investigation. Isabella and I moved to Oregon, where she runs an art therapy program for survivors of family abuse, while I work developing safety protocols for medications in rural communities. Our real wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple beach ceremony with only the people who truly loved us. Dr. Hendricks walked us down the aisle, where we vowed to protect each other not with money or status, but with honesty and courage. The Morrison poisoning attempt taught me that toxic family is like poison. The longer you allow it to remain in your system, the more damage it causes. Sometimes the only cure is to cut off the supply completely. Robert tried to contact me from prison last month, claiming remorse and asking for forgiveness. I returned the letter unopened. Forgiveness is for people who genuinely recognize the harm they've caused, not for manipulators looking for their next victim. Isabella found peace knowing that we saved lives by exposing her parents' crimes. They gave me life, she reflected, but you taught me how to live it with dignity. If this story of justice and rebuilding touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who turned betrayal into triumph and poison into purpose. The last I heard, the Morrisons were serving their sentences in separate federal prisons, their names removed from every building and foundation they once funded. Me? Well, I just got approval to open our 10th community clinic, saving lives instead of destroying them. I found that the best revenge against those who try to poison you is to live so fully and meaningfully that their evil becomes just a footnote in the much larger story you've chosen to write.